Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So, like Tom mentioned, we're going to be talking today about automated assurance for mass scale networks and how do we enable our customers to deliver enhanced digital experiences. And together here with me today is Tom Footit from our recent Accedian acquisition, and now part of Cisco, and myself. My name is Rana Kazamel, and I'm part of the provider connectivity and data center business unit.
All right, let's get to it.
Perfect. So we've got 30 minutes today, and we plan to really start off by explaining what are the challenges that we're really solving for operators of mass scale networks when it comes to monitoring their services and being able to monetize on the SLAs and basically deliver better enhanced experiences. And then we're going to talk about how does that actually fit within the end-to-end automation framework for multi-vendor and multi-domain networks. And then we'll dig deeper into the assurance aspect of it. We'll talk about Crosswork, automated assurance, and basically all the work we've been doing with Accedian, integrating Accedian as part of that solution to basically leverage the analytics and the probing capabilities that they bring in, which are really best in class. And then we're going to show you a live demo, so you get to see this as well in action and ask us any questions that you have as well. So starting off with really what are the challenges that we're solving for, right? So every operator, their bread and butter is ensuring that they can deliver on enhanced SLAs and basically give a better customer experience so that they can maintain their market share and reduce customer churn and so on. And actually the hardest part is not just monitoring the SLAs and understanding when a problem happens, but it's also how do you troubleshoot that and map this all the way back into your network. And as you know, SP networks are pretty multi-vendor and they've got multiple domains, and that can be pretty complex with the environment that we have today, with also varying numbers of tools. Some of them are pretty proprietary, working only for one respective vendor, right? So we're going to talk about how the solution that we're offering today can help solve that, provide you that single pane of glass across the whole network, mapping your services and the service intent down to your network and enabling you to kind of provide those enhanced services. Now, if we take a look at the end-to-end framework, right, and it's really important to call that out because assurance is part of an end-to-end lifecycle automation capability. And if you really want to be able to simplify mass scale networks and automate them, you need to have those building blocks that you see here, and they all need to work completely multi-vendor, right? So starting off from your workflow that really defines your business logic of how you want to automate the operations that you do every day in your network and have that fully customized for your environment. And we enable that to be fully customized via low-code automation. And we've got Crosswork Workflow Manager that we've launched last May that actually enables our customers to do that. Then you obviously need a service provisioning engine that enables you to push instantaneously and launch your new services onto the network and do that again in a multi-vendor fashion. We've got the NSO product that's been there for quite a number of years, and it's been widely deployed by the top operators globally. We have over 200 customers using that and over 170 multi-vendor devices that are supported today, right? From there, after you've provisioned, you actually want to have the deep visibility into your services, but also your network, and be able to look at that across the multiple domains. So we've got on the Crosswork automation, complete visibility onto the network, including the topology, inventory, fault, and performance. But then we've also acquired Sedona several years back to also enhance the capability there, but for adding as well the optical domain into that visibility. So you get to see your service down to your IP layer, down to your optical layer, down to your fiber, fully correlated across a multi-vendor network. Then we get into assurance, which is really going to be our focus for today. And we're going to talk about how we deliver on intent-based assurance and what does that really mean? Is this a buzzword or, there's more to that? And then how we've been bringing Crosswork and Accedian together. And we're going to go through that next. Planning is another piece of the life cycle, and it's really around how do you ensure that you're planning your network even offline, catering for when you need to do upgrades and your utilization of all your links, and be able to kind of plan your network based on other constraints like energy, for example. You want to build a green, sustainable network. How can you optimize your network for that? So we're adding more constraints as we go. And then we get into optimization, which is really around enabling your network to react in real time to the service requirements and ensuring that you're always taking the most optimal path through the network, and depending on whatever your service constraints are, right? They can be latency, bandwidth, energy consumption, and so on, right? Now, getting into the assurance piece of this, so, intent-based service assurance, what does that really mean, right? Very, very simple terms, it means that you're actually starting from the service intent. You're starting from the definition of your service, the SLA, the metrics within that SLA that you need to meet to be able to deliver on that service. And we take that as our source of truth. So that's what we leverage in NSO for the provisioning aspect, but it's also what we leverage in our service assurance stack to ensure that we're always monitoring on that and helping you always ensure that you're delivering on this. So instead of flooding you with alarms and alerts that you get from the network and you to try to figure out, okay, what do those mean? How did this fault impact a service? You don't need to do that anymore. We're going to show you a very simplistic view starting from the service itself, tell you is your service healthy or not? And if it's not healthy, we'll be able to show you the view of why is it not healthy and how can you remediate that much faster than today, right? So that's, in very simple terms, the target here. So this is kind of the, look at it as the architecture slash kind of how the views would map to the levels of network operations that we typically have in operators, right? So usually you have a first line service operations center, they're sitting behind the big screens, dashboards, to look at how are the services doing, and they're the first ones that actually get a call when an issue happens, saying, okay, a customer is complaining about their service, and they need a very quick way to be able to look at the SLA performance of that specific service and identify are any of those metrics breached or not, right? And that's what you can get with the Skylight Analytics platform that can ingest data from all types of sources, not just the network or the probes, and be able to correlate all this data together and tell you exactly the health of your service end to end. Now, after you've discovered there's an issue and you, let's say, figured out the issue is that on this specific VPN service, the latency is too high, that first level operations center team would pass it on to the second level, let's say within the transport domain, and tell them, look, you've got an issue in your IP and optical network, the latency is basically too high, right? Then that level operator can look at the Crosswork hierarchical controller that I spoke about earlier that came from our Sedona acquisition that we've been building on. And that really gives them the correlation from the service layer to the IP, optical, and also fiber topology. So leveraging Crosswork HCO, they can really figure out, okay, is the issue in the IP domain or the optical domain, and where exactly is that issue located? Let's say the issue is in the IP segment. That then gets passed down to the domain SME, basically the IP expert in that operations center. And they can drill down into the IP SDN controller that's also multi-vendor in our portfolio. That's the Crosswork network controller. And they can then troubleshoot and find what's the issue on the IP side and be able to remediate that and make changes to the network to basically remediate the service, right? So as you can see, the views are aligned to the roles that are typically there in an operator environment so that it's customizable for that. Having said that, all those have the same look and feel. They're part of the same portfolio, fully integrated, and we've got also all the needed APIs to also integrate with maybe existing systems that our customers have in case they want different views as well. So with that, I'll pass on to Tom to talk about more of Accedian capabilities.
Thanks, Rana. So basically, we're going to start at the top of the stack, right? So looking at that first level, right? So how do I understand that my services I'm providing are having problems, right? So what's going on? Are my customers complaining? Are they going to complain, right? So trying to be able to be proactive to determine that there's an issue in the network before the customer calls and complains. or being reactive, customers complaining, I want to be able to figure out why they're complaining, right? And this really, as Rana mentioned, this is really, targeted at a service provider audience, but also like large enterprises that run their own transport network, right? Same kind of idea, right? They're kind of service provider like. So if you look at like the big, Amazon and Google and that kind of audience, but also like large enterprises, manufacturing, finance, those type of people who are running their own transport network. This solution is really kind of aimed at them, right? So that transport network's got a bunch of services running across it. I want to know, are those services running well, or are they going to have problems, or are they already having problems, and how do I figure that out, right? So
I'm sorry,
yeah,
we've thrown the term service around a couple of times,
yeah,
and I'm thinking about large enterprise, who has dug up lines to lay optical and
yeah.
centralize, and this tool could come in handy for them. But there's a looser definition of what services in the enterprise versus what services from a service provider. So can you kind of define, when we talk about services, are we mainly talking about IP services, or are we
Yeah.
talking about higher level services?
No, we're talking about like IP services, right? So we're talking about like, layer, most of what we're talking about today is sort of like layer 3 down in the network, right? We're not talking about like application experiences and stuff like that, right? So in the Cisco assurance world, right? Those upper layers are like like Thousand Eyes and App Dynamics, right? Looking at the application performance, or looking at like internet and cloud performance, right? What we do as Accedian, which acquired by Cisco, along with the Crosswork platform for automation, is look at the layers below that, right? So we're really looking at like the internal network, right? We're not looking at internet, we're not looking at cloud, we're not looking at services up at layer 7. We're talking about like IP services across a transport network, right? That's really what we're focused on. So a service provider, that might be in a mobile network going from, the internet handoff to the cell site. For if they're doing B2B services, it's going, from location, data center to location to office to that kind of stuff, right? If you're talking about large enterprises, it's, manufacturing sites, office locations. They got their own, like you said, they're digging up fiber, they're running their own transport network. It's those services. That's what we're covering. We're kind of down in that layer of the network, if that makes sense. And so basically, we have a platform that collects all the data that we generate, which I'll talk about in a second. It basically collects all the data we generate and analyzes it. So we're using machine learning, and we're using algorithms to try and identify issues in the network, right? So trying to be proactive, say, hey, you know what? There's a potential issue here that maybe the customer's not complaining yet, but they're going to complain, right? So we want to be able to analyze different sources of data, our own probe data, or other sources of telemetry data from the network, and try and help figure out, okay, is there going to be an issue here? And if so, what layer is it at, as Rana mentioned, and then sort of hand it off down the stacks to help resolve the issue, right? So we have a bunch of what we call sensors. They're basically probes. So what people do is they put these things in the network, right? And it's anything from a Docker container to like a smart SFP, right? So an SFP that's got a little chip in it. And these things basically generate test traffic. They push packets through the network. And again, we're mostly talking about like layer 2, layer 3 usually for this. They push packets throughout the network. And the goal with that is that you can see down to like the millisecond what's happening in the network, right? So again, like if you're talking about like big coarse grain stuff, you're talking about, seconds or minutes. But if you're running that transport network and some of our manufacturing customers, for example, or service provider customers, milliseconds matter. Right, so we're looking down at that level of detail to understand what's going on. So we use these probes to push packets to the network, and then basically build a statistical model of how those packets are behaving. Right, percentile, standard deviation, lots of statistical analysis of the behavior of the packets to understand what's going on in the network. How is the network behaving? And are we meeting our SLAs? Are we running into problems? Are we potentially going to run into problems? And if so, what to do about it? Right. And so that's really like, something a layer 3, right? We're doing, many packets per second, tagging with specific QoS values, specific VLAN tags. Like we're generating traffic in the network to sort of simulate a higher level, right? So we're not testing at layer 7, but we're testing layer 3 traffic in a way that simulates how applications are using the network. And we generate a ton of different metrics, right? Lots of statistical analysis, hundreds of different metrics just by pushing packets to the network, right? And we're looking at a lot of different behaviors in the network just by analyzing those packets. And then we're basically bringing it back into our platform to say, okay, what's going on? I want to build a macro view, a high level view, big picture. Is my network good or not? And then I want to be able to drive into the details, look at, like I said, like pattern analysis, anomaly detection, clustering analysis, to be able to say, okay, is this issue isolated to one part of the network? Is it broader through the network? Is it isolated, a handful of sites being impacted? Is it all my customers being impacted? What's going on here? Right, and then be able to sort of drill down and see it by customer, by network slice, by type of traffic, sort and filter, and be able to sort of drill down and say, hey, where's my issue? And then once that's done, then it's about sort of handing it off to someone who's going to try and address the problem. And I'll hand it back to Rana to talk a little more about that.
Thank you, Tom. So basically, within that transport domain, IP and optical, you want to have an ability to correlate across those different layers in the network and really understand how your service actually maps to them, right? So this is kind of a representation to show you this. You can really map your service down to what's the IP path that it takes over the network, both the logical path, but also the physical path, interface by interface, so you really know all the parameters that would impact that service from an IP perspective. And then also down to the optical layer that also has its own separate kind of switching with all the ROADMs that lie beneath it, and then down to the fiber, right? So the power of this is like a fiber cut, for example. You can correlate this all the way back to which services is that fiber cut impacting, right? And the power of this is the time it takes you to resolve an issue becomes so much faster given all this knowledge and correlation that's readily available, right? And you can see here, it can also be identified across the map and be able to really look at the location of where the issues happened. And you can find the correlation of all of those there here that you see in the middle and identify the problem immediately. And not to forget to mention a very important part. This is actually a very complex problem that is being solved here because, as you know, optical networks traditionally are pretty proprietary in the sense that you would have an optical vendor with the respective optical NMS or optical controller that only manages that specific set of devices. And basically, if you want to have an end-to-end view, even just across your own optical network, if you've got multiple vendors, the only way to do this today is to have a capability like Crosswork HCO. That's also been defined in standards in alignment with IETF and the TIP forum and others, right? So this is actually quite an innovation to enable our customers to bring all those domains together.
So I have a question.
Yeah,
this is Pascal Hager. How do you tie that back to an intent-based network? So let's say there is a fiber cut and your customers are being rerouted. That adds latency, perhaps it adds congestion. How do you then apply the intent of my premium customers with which I've signed SLAs and maybe credits will be due, will be less impacted or not be impacted by this, and they get preferential treatment over my lower paying customers?
Yeah, so the nice thing about this is it all ties into as well the policies that you set in the network. Like let's say if we're looking at a typical network like this, you're using maybe segment routing, you have a policy defined that really helps optimize the SR path over the network. So basically when a failure like this happens and an impact happens, you can really optimize around that to tie back to meeting the constraints of that service. And the nice thing is that here you'll be able to also visualize that and see exactly what happened. So you'll be able to see the fiber cut, you'll be able to see the reroute that happened to basically take the service back to a healthy state by taking an alternative route as well. And you'll be able to visualize that and see how it changed over time as well. So the trending aspect is also pretty key.
And I think part of it as well is that, like some policies you're going to set up ahead of time, right, to be able to address this. But then the other thing is that using the solution we were just talking about, if you're seeing a problem happening, you may want to adjust that, right? So that's what, when Ron and I showed that diagram with the circle at the beginning, that's really, we're not all the way there yet. We're still working on the problem, but the goal is to be able to sort of close that loop, right? So you want to have those policies set up ahead of time to be able to make sure you prioritize things right. But if things are going really wrong or that's not working, you want to be able to adjust the service parameters, right? And be able to say, hey, you know what? We're not meeting our SLAs and we're going to adjust based on that, right? So we're going to route traffic differently, or we're going to adjust those policies you set the service up with in the first place so that we can keep doing what we want to do, right? Whether it's higher priority traffic or higher paying customers, or customers who have bigger SLA penalties, to be able to adjust that. Or like Rana was saying, we were looking also at like carbon and power consumption, right? So to keep people on like a lower, not just necessarily a lower latency path, but like a less carbon intensive path as well, right? So there's lots of different potential parameters we're looking at there. And the whole goal, we'll show this at the end, is sort of feeding that back so you can sort of get that loop and make a service change and address the problem that you're trying to solve in the first place.
With that, how adjustable, or what are the inputs and frequency of update of the input for these parameters? Power is extremely variable, for example. How do we adjust for that?
Yeah, so typically we're measuring that over time using like a heuristic. So you're attributing a certain amount of the consumption for that one service, because obviously power, if you've got a router, right, it's the power that router is consuming is divided across all the services running across it and so on. So you have to build up. You're not making those changes like, instantaneously, right? You're not saying, oh, something happened, I'm going to change something. You're typically looking at a behavior over time, whether that's something like power or carbon, or whether it's latency as well. You don't want to make instantaneous changes. You're trying to look at a behavior over time and then say, okay, we have a problem here, I want to address it.
So, this team is really good at coming up with these edge use cases, so I'm learning from them. And this is not an unrealistic edge use case. So power is, there's footprint of, if I have a sustainable data center and power during the day, I absolutely want to fail over to this sustainable data center. Yeah. Power at night, I absolutely do not want to fall over to this data center. Yeah. So I'm asking, how robust are these assurance rules that I can create?
So just to kind of add to what Tom said, right? So I think that from a sustainability perspective, think of it as multiple steps, right? Step one is you need to get the visibility to basically be able to see, okay, my power consumption, how does that vary across the different parts of the network? The thing we're also working on right now is enabling the next phase, which is about optimizing in real time based on energy as a constraint, right? If you look at how we do SR policies today, we optimize based on various constraints like latency and others. Energy is another constraint as well, and it can also vary. You can even have a constraint that says even the source of the energy, how green it is, would be a constraint to add for that real-time optimization as part of the solution. So that would enable you to basically make those changes, even not just the network path, but even just at a device level. To your point, you can make certain decisions to say, okay, look, my utilization now fell below a certain threshold. I can then do an admin basically down for a certain set of interfaces and kind of, reduce my power consumption where it makes sense, right? So,
or route a service differently based on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So is a lot of this based on the probing that's done from the interfaces and the synthetic transactions you're doing, or you ingesting the actual state of the devices as well?
So a bit of both, right? So yeah, and the solution I was talking about at the beginning, the Accedian solution, ingests both of those. So we ingest both our probing data, but also telemetry from the devices, right? And Crosswork's doing the same, right? So basically we're grabbing, that probing data, and then to understand path and latency and other parameters, but then also pulling the device data, because obviously things like power consumption and so on come from there, right? The probing can't determine something like power consumption, but also can't determine something like, there's an issue with the device or whatever else, right? So we'll talk a little more about that in a second.
Perfect. Thank you. So now moving on to the Crosswork Network Controller, which, as I mentioned, it's really the SDN controller as part of for the IP domain. And again, it aligns to the standard definition in IETF. to have a domain controller for that part of the network. And we basically do assurance at multiple levels, right? So like what Tom was just mentioning, you want to start first with the basics, infrastructure health. You want to know at the element level, at the device level, what are the performance metrics, what are the faults that you're seeing, and all the telemetry data that you get from there. Then you take it a level up, and then you want to look at your whole transport policy health, right? Across that network, look at your SR, PM data, for example, that can tell you hop by hop, latency, parameters, and others. And then you take it a level up, which is really the service health. And here, for example, an L2 or an L3 VPN service, you really are able to then map that and understand that IP VPN service, is it healthy or not, and be able to report on that right away within CNC. And then lastly, the last level, that's like with 5G, you've heard a lot about 5G network slicing, which is another set of services that would be offered. And there you would also need to report on the health of that specific slice that the operator is offering to their end customers as well, right? So you really get the capability to see all those layers.
I have one question to that. With the service health, yeah? So let's say I have an interruption. One of my fibers was cut, yeah? Often then you have follow-up problems, yeah? Because a lot of the other links are overutilized, a lot of the services going down, or they run on 5G backups and so on. Would you also be able to show this on your platform so that somebody understands this fiber cut was the first impact, and these are the, let's say, follow-up services that are impacted by this initial event, yeah?
Exactly. Well, what we're doing is always over time, right? So we're looking at like behavior over time. So when you see something like that happen, you can see, okay, that happened, and then what were the follow-on effects, right? And that could be something from a fiber cut. It could be based on load of time of day, can adjust that, right? So what's happening at 4 p.m. is different than what's happening at 4 o'clock in the morning. And so, those kind of effects affect things over time. So most of what we're doing is evaluating time series, right? Behaviors over time. And it could be, yes, a fiber cut that's causing that, or it could be, like I said, congestion from other reasons. There's the cell site at the train station is super busy at certain times of the day, and it ends up getting knock-on effects to other parts of the network, right?
And you have then also the service mapping. Let's say location A, all the customers in location Amsterdam are impacted by this and so on. So you can sort out from the interruption to the actually customers and who, let's say, maybe when an SLA is starting and so on, yeah?
Yes.
Exactly.
100%. And 100%. And actually, the nice thing about this, again, Accedian and Cisco coming together here, we have that capability now. Like once you provision the service, once you start launching a new service, you're immediately tying to that the Accedian probing capabilities and analytics so that you can monitor the service over time and you can immediately define, see the impact when it happens, right? So we've got that time.
From the customer side, often when we have a problem, we call the ISPs. They have a problem to match you, yeah? Then you are infected by something, but they have problems with matching the customer, the contract, and the actually incident, yeah?
Exactly, and that's exactly what we're there to do, right? It's basically that first top level, right? So I understand, like, it's a service going from here to here. I know which customer that's carrying, our customers that's carrying. I know, what the SLA is for it, right? So I have all that information at hand. And so if there's an issue, I can quickly look at it and drill down. And then if it's an IP issue, pass it off to the IP controller and go resolve the issue in the IP network, or the optical controller and go resolve the issue in the optical network. And I know, like, which customers are affected, how long have they been affected for, like all that kind of information, right? It's because you're exactly right. Most people, a lot of operators today just don't understand that, whether it's a service provider network, even an enterprise network, right? What's the impact of this issue? Who's it affecting? And if they call and complain, You know, is it the same issue? Is it separate issues? That kind of stuff.
Also for the customer side, if you get a nice email, we have an interruption, we are working on it. It's a different perspective versus everything's not working. I try to call somebody, nobody knows what is actually ongoing.
Yeah, proactive versus
Is
reactive.
there an integration with Cisco Thousand Eyes, or will not be integrated, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I know we're out of time. So I'll sort of try to finish up with that. So Thousand Eyes and both Thousand Eyes and also App Dynamics on the application side and so on. So we just started announcing some. There was actually some press release that went out today on that. We're just starting to do those integrations because, like I mentioned, Thousand Eyes is really looking at like internet, cloud, and SaaS. We're looking at the internal network, but a lot of the time you're putting all those things together, right? And so we want to be able to show those in a combined way. And Cisco's just starting to announce that. We were just acquired 4 months ago, and we're just starting to announce some of that capability, so you can kind of put like Thousand Eyes and App Dynamics
together.
and together in a combined view. So
And just to kind of think of it from an end-to-end assurance perspective, like Thousand Eyes, think of it as that end-to-end assurance platform that then would integrate with the respective domain assurance capabilities. All what we've been talking about here is within that service provider transport domain, and basically we would integrate with Thousand Eyes as part of that end-to-end view.
yeah,
right?
so they're looking like across the internet, like big picture, SaaS application availability, that kind of stuff, right? Whereas we're like down in a specific silo. But again, you want to be able to combine those silos together, and that's what Cisco is working on, so that you can sort of get all that in one picture, if that makes sense.
Now, having said that, we've got a couple more minutes for the demo, so let's do that.
Okay. Let's try and get the demo video to run. Hopefully it will. Sorry, this resolution is not great. That's not the screen's fault. That's my fault. So the goal. So this user interface is just an example. You might build different dashboards and different views for different types of users, right? So depending if you're troubleshooting or you're whatever. But basically, what you want to do is try and bring up those key performance indicators, right? So what are the key performance indicators I care about in my network? Maybe it's like packet loss or congestion or latency or whatever else, right? So I want to bubble those up to the top. I want to be able to see what's going on in a big picture of my network. And then if I have an issue in a specific area that I care about, I want to be able to drill down and see that, right? So my mouse should, there you go, right? So I have some issue with packet loss, right? So I'm going to click and try and figure out, okay, like big picture, is this like one problem, 10 problems, right? What's going on? So I'm going to pop this open in a more detailed analysis view, and then I can look at correlating, and I can see, oh, maybe I got a couple of different problems there, matching. Let me look at the network topology, and then I can actually help sort of drill down and look at a specific issue. And then if I know it's in an IP issue, then this is, as Rana mentioned earlier, okay, now I'm a different persona. I'm now in the IP network, and I'm trying to troubleshoot it. So now I'm like looking at the VPN services delivering that. I'm looking at the routers involved in doing it. I can see the data from the Accedian platform over here in the Crosswork platform. So if I'm in the IP domain trying to fix the problem, I can see that data I was looking at before in context here. And then I can look at all the different devices involved in delivering this. Are there any faults showing up? Are there any issues showing up? And sort of actually go and find the device that was causing the problem and fix the issue. So the whole idea is I can start from a big picture. I know like I'm having packet loss issues. I can find where the issue is. I can hand it off to the right person, and they can go down and drill down and actually figure out which routers or which devices are causing the problem, configuration issue, whatever else it is, and fix it.
It's not monitoring, but it's proactive monitoring, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Great.